on the energy transition, or Energiewende as we say in German, as an important step to the great transformation. I'm Katja Rottmann. I work with German Watch in the team German and European Climate Policies, and I will moderate the workshop today. And we will have my colleague Jan, who's sitting there in the middle, who will do the moderation tomorrow, and he will also help me to visualize the results of the workshop today. And hello. This is, we want to discuss the energy transition as one example here. And I've put here the objectives for our workshop, and that was also discussed this morning already, that we would like to use the whole conference to move to action, and to also to not only to talk about the content, but also try to go forward and to think about ways what can we actually do. And that's what we have discussed also with our input givers, that we propose to have these two objectives for this session. That's how can we as a group bring the energy transition forward globally. So just for us to think about what can we do, and not only to think about what are the chances, what are the challenges, the barriers, but also really trying to identify how we as civil society organizations can actually bring things forward. So this is the idea for the objective for the next 2 hours that we have. And the structure will be that we will have a short round of presentations so that everyone knows who you are and who's, where you're coming from, which background do you have, what are your interests. After that we will have a short input, two short inputs of about 10 to 15 minutes each from our two speakers, which I will present then, or maybe they have already presented themselves because they have also put themselves on the list. We are very happy to have them here because they will give two different, and I think for our topic, very helpful and useful inputs from two different points of view and two angles. So this will be the first half of the workshop, first 60 minutes, and then the second half we would really like to use for the discussion with all of you, and to discuss different questions to reach these objectives. And in the end we would like to wrap up to bring what we've discussed, and maybe also the solutions that we have found, to bring them to the World Café, which will take place just after the workshops, where you will also be able to discuss what has been said or the results of the other workshops. So there we will also learn more about what has happened. And maybe also to start, we have a proposal for three guiding questions. This is just a starting point and a proposal, and I think that once we will dive into the discussion later on, we can see whether these three are the ones you want to discuss, or whether you see that there are other ones we should also talk about. This is our first proposal, just to see what we can do, and we thought together with our input givers that advancing the energy transition, what can we learn from each other, from different backgrounds, from different countries, from different organizations. What is your evaluation? What has worked in your countries? What hasn't worked, and why? So to identify also the barriers, why actually we cannot advance with the energy transition and move to more renewable energies. Why doesn't it happen? And then in the end, we would also like to see what can we do with it. So trying to identify how can we act or react to the barriers that are there in order to identify what would be possible solutions or possible strategies for us as civil society organizations to go ahead. But before we get into the inputs, and before we also get into the discussion, I would like every one of you to present him or herself, taking into account what he or she has written on the sheet of paper. That is your name, your organization, who you work for, and where are you from. The sector that the idea was to see, because we have people from the agriculture background and people from the energy or climate background to see what's your main focus of work. And then we also have asked the question, what does energy transition really mean for you? So it would be really interesting to learn from all of you, what's your evaluation, what does this mean for you, and what do you think about it? And we would rather have a short round, everyone states his or her ideas, and we wouldn't rather enter into this discussion at this point, but just collect what you think, and then we would start with the inputs. So I would suggest that you start because you're sitting there, and I don't know if you have put yourself already.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of Manuel. Rivera is my name. I'm half Chilean, half German. I work in a small institute in Potsdam, Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, which is led by Klaus Töpfer, whom the international folks of you probably know as the former unit director, and who played a certain role in the German energy transition while leading the so-called Ethics Commission, which recommended phasing out nuclear energy. And they're an institute concerned with many issues, amongst others SDGs, which are a bit far from here, but not so far, because of course sustainable energy for all will be one of these targets. And with the colleagues from the so-called platform on the our panel on the energy change, to say that it's the heart of the truth, and it's a neglected topic, I think, in German energy transition, commonly, daily. Decentralization, because the impulses generated by the changing of the producer structures are of particular relevance to people. All questionnaires show that people, all polls show that people and processes that are very much interested in this autonomy aspect and dealing economically with energy in a different way is what interests people. And this is, of course, a thing that has to do with societal and economic reorganization, and not only with changing a technology. So this would be it.
I think we just...
Also, I make it very short because I only skipped into this conference actually, and I just asked the team leader here if I can just listen for 2 hours, because I'm actually working with GIZ, which is not invited here, and we are doing more tomorrow, and another approach towards transition. We are having a conference tomorrow, and I just wanted to have some ideas how you were working in the energy transition area. So I just don't want to put so much words on me, because I really just want to be a guest and listen.
And what's your, then at least your feeling about Energiewende? Do you have any?
Yeah, actually I'm working in a leadership development approach, and we would like to do a project next year about Energiewende, like connect people from the German Energiewende activities with people in other countries, and we are more going towards this idea of what kind of leadership you need for getting those motivation or those movements going. So we're entering in a different perspective, but would like to connect in the future with people from the NGO sector who are working in the energy transition topic. So this, and it was just an approach, very ad hoc decision of me of this free day today to say, oh, I will have a look. Perhaps there's some connection where we can pick on in the future, but it's not like I don't want to interfere here or having any GIZ logo on my head, because I'm really, from a personal motivation, trying to get connections and see what kind of discussions are going on where we can pick up. If you don't mind, I stay. If you mind, I would go. Is that okay? But I'm not really entering too much into the discussion, because I'm not an energy specialist. I'm entering from my educational part.
But I think every perspective is very good.
Yeah, so my topics are transition, leadership, transformation. All right.
Hello everyone, my name is Tarek. I'm based in Bahrain. I run 3BL Associates, which is a social impact think do tank. And we work on sustainable regenerative development in the MENA region, connecting government and civil society to work on some of these issues. I'm also representing the Arab Youth Climate Movement and GCCA's Adopt and Negotiate project, which In terms of how I view the issue, I put very broadly transition from scarcity to abundance. So one of the things I do is I'm a biomimicry specialist, so I study nature and how nature actually has come to solve many of these solutions which we're sitting in this room trying to figure out. And that's very much how nature has harnessed things. It's harnessed everything that's in abundance and available, rather than building communities around scarce resources and damaging resources.
My name is Alexandra. I come from the Independent Institute for Environmental Issues, which is based in Berlin and was founded by East German scientists who wanted to bring forward environmental issues directly after the wall came down, and it still exists with several focuses. And my focus is environmental law and public participation. And as I'm also personally interested in the issue of energy transition because I'm part of the transition town movement, and I live in a small place next to Berlin, and there we try to establish energy transition on a small scale in our town there. For this is not a perspective I bring here, and for me, energy transition is a very crucial part. Generally speaking, to adapt human lifestyle to the reality of our planet, which is as it is, and we can't change the planet. We must adapt our habits. That's my perception of it.
I'm Nina Jamal. I work with Tick 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 part-time, coordinating the EU campaign. And in the rest of my time, I work with IndieAct, the League of Independent Activists, which I'm representing here. I come from Lebanon, I'm based in Austria, and the kind of work that I do with IndieAct is partly linked to international climate policy, and in Austria linked to a renewable energy future. We believe that 100% renewable future is possible in Austria, and we're developing projects to move along that pathway. What the energy transition means to me is, to some extent, innovation. If a country decides to go into an energy transition, it will give a boost. It will trigger a boost in innovation. Companies will want to develop technologies that would fit into that kind of structure. Legal transformation would also be important. Legislation would need to change so that they can support that transition. And a low-carbon future could be achieved much quicker. We'd be on a quicker pathway to a low-carbon future.
Hi, my name is Jan. I'm working with German Watch, and energy transition means for me mainly, we discussed this yesterday, actually that the word transition is maybe wrong, maybe it's an energy turnaround. And because it's really a revolution that we want to trigger here, because we really change the whole system, and therefore it's really interesting for me. How can we get it? How can we finance this? And how can we have social acceptance of this? Because for me, these 2 points are the 2 great barriers to the whole system come to a new system. So that's why I'm looking forward to the discussion maybe to discuss these 2 points.
Yeah, hello, my name is Dirk. I'm also working for German Watch in the Berlin office, in the team of international climate policy. I'm also focusing on China and projects of German Watch in China. Although energy transition in what is now happening in Germany is I think, a very important model worldwide. And so far, I have, from the one hand, the perspective of how to communicate and also to see and look for synergies in other countries. So I think this is also very important that if Germany fails to change their system, this will definitely also influence many other changes going on in China, in other economies worldwide. And well, yes, I think energy transition for me is definitely a change of the whole system, and regarding renewable energy, energy efficiency as the technical issues, or one of them, and also the change of the consumption behavior. I think that definitely will also mean that we have to think about how we personally, individually use energy. Yeah, that's brief.
My name is Wolfgang Kühn. I come from Bonn. My organization is Klimaschutz e.V. It's a German name. We are organized CDM projects in Indonesia, solar cooking projects and so. But in my colleague do it now in Africa, but it is I'm surprised here. This is and I can what are the barriers? I can say the barriers I think is the most barriers are bad informations, no informations, and this is the right thing. It's better I hear only and in this discussion.
Okay, my name is Wolfgang Dose. I'm engaged in the German Foundation for Sustainability, which name is Stiftung Zukunftsfähigkeit. It's the German Watch Stiftung, more or less, and so it's clear why I'm here. I'm engaged in several organizations since about 40 years, which cope with problems of ecology, especially regenerative energy. And well, I'm especially interested in the perspective of getting 100% renewable energy. I think that has to be our goal. We need to reach this goal. We need decentralized structures, not the normal centralized we have today. And we also have to foster efficiency, as already said, and perhaps sufficiency, a question of lifestyle. And well, I'm particularly interested in the barriers we have to overcome to reach this goal. Thank you.
My name is Bi Shuo. I work for Greenpeace China. And my work is basically twofold. One is more international climate politics, the UNFCCC courses, and some other international climate issues. And the other half is more domestic related in China, mainly renewable energy policy, the climate change legislation, and also developing energy revolution in the Chinese context. So yeah, that's pretty much my work at Greenpeace. In terms of how do I interpret energy transition or energy turnaround, I think the first and foremost important thing is energy consumption, especially for countries like China. The sheer scale of consumption is so big. I think this is something that the public, the policymaker, have to discuss and have to have a better understanding and clear idea on when and how that we can peak, where we can cap our energy consumption and CO2 emission. So this is, I think, the first thing. The second thing is more societal or systematic. you need systematic change in order to accommodate different and more diverse, cleaner energy sources. And that's something that is already started to happen in China, but it is still very slow from our perspective. So I think this is something that we need to address as well. I'll leave it there and leave more to the input section.
Hi, my name is Paul Horsman. I'm the campaign director for the Global Campaign for Climate Action, or Tick 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 as it's better known. And I've been a climate energy campaigner for a long time, over 20 years, and mostly with Greenpeace, and I've usually worked on the dirty end of the energy issues, hitting the oil industry mainly. But more recent years I've been looking at the alternatives. And in terms of what I think about the energy transition, I think you'll see from my presentation, so I'll leave it for that.
Great. So, as I already mentioned, I also work with Germanwatch, and I've been focusing a lot on the power grid, which for the German discussion is one of the building blocks of making the energy turnaround happen. But I think that from my personal point of view, this is one aspect, it's a technical aspect, but it's also business questions, because it means a lot of investment. But this is only one thing, and I think what you've all mentioned is like more that Energiewende, it's not only about big companies, about money to be shifted from one business model to another, but it's also about people and whether people take part in it and also see their own responsibilities in how much energy do we consume. And also, I think it's also a question of who has the control about what energy model do we have, and is it actually something that also people want, and where they also have their benefits from, and where they also see their responsibilities.
Okay, I'll watch for the card. I've just prepared a few slides. As I said in my introduction, I've worked on climate energy issues for a long time, particularly on climate, and a lot of time looking at the dirty side of the fossil fuel industry part. And as a campaigner, I'm interested in how you find the power and hit the power in order to get the change that we need. I think the first thing to remember is people don't need energy. People need the services that energy provides. And it's important to look at it in that way, because the energy companies want us to look at it in terms of supplying more energy. But we know that energy is fundamental to achieving social, environmental and economic goals. But we also know that the current way that energy is produced and distributed is causing global environmental damage, social disruption and human health effects. And over 1.4 billion people around the world have got no access to basic energy services. These are all facts and figures that we all know. I just wanted to state the context. So our current energy system is completely contrary to achieving any kind of social equity or environmental protection, in other words, by any definition of sustainable development. We know that fossil fuels contribute over 40% of the greenhouse gases that cause climate change. We know the extraction, distribution and the processing of fossil fuels causes environmental damage, and social and human health impacts. We know that tackling climate change and to ensure sustainable development in its full meaning, we must change our energy systems. And nuclear is not an option. So to come up with some questions, we need to break our dependency on fossil fuels. In terms of development, we need to prevent any lock-in to dirty energy technologies and sources. We know that these energy technologies that are currently used, they are investments for 25, 30 plus years' time. So whatever investments we make now have got to be, what we want to lock into is clean technologies. And so the question is, how do we encourage the transition to renewable clean energy futures, which includes financial strategies as well as looking at production and consumption. And when I say renewable clean energy futures, I mean the whole range. Renewable energy to me is not the technology, it's decentralized energy, it's the way of looking at energy, it's not just looking at different technologies. And I think today we can't discuss energy in isolation, because, and this is where my view about energy now, it's challenging the fundamental political power structure that maintains the status quo. Energy is not just about power for people to switch on lights, it is about political power. It is about empowerment of communities. And this is, I believe, in campaigning terms, we need to think in those constructs because that's the way the utilities and governments think. And that's why we are currently locked into power structures, political power structures and energy power structures that are controlled. I think at the moment as well we've got this, what some people call the triple E crisis, the economic, environment and energy crisis, which are feeding off each other. So again, coming back, changing the frame of the energy debate requires challenging that status quo which supports the large centralized systems and the drive just to increase supply to satisfy needs, and therefore it continues to block it continues to lock communities into unsustainable futures. So in other words, delivering a truly sustainable energy requires rethinking completely the way we produce, use and distribute energy. We need to produce energy using renewable energy sources, we need to use it efficiently, and we need efficient local distribution networks and smart grids. We know this can be done. There are forests of reports that have shown us that renewable energies work. The IPCC has produced, these are just a few. The IPCC has produced reports, UNEP, UNDP, IEA. You know, we have shelves creaking under the weights of reports that say it can be done. We have similar reports showing how scenarios can take us to 80%, 50%, 100% renewable energy. We know that it can be achieved. These are just some of them. So why not? What's the barriers? And this is where I think, we as civil society or wanting to achieve the change, we need to identify some of these barriers. All of this work that's been done shows very much that the barriers are not technological, they are political. Yes, there's technology, there's going to be development, there's going to be advances in solar, wind and others, but predominantly the barriers are political, not technical. There are perceptions that energy sources are not adequate to meet needs, that they're expensive, that there's a lack of appropriate policy or there's poor policy implementation, there isn't the right financial mechanisms, there's a difficulty in accessing finance, there's different grids, there's poor planning, there's a lock-in of existing technology, all of which are some of the barriers that if you're working on energy you'll come across time and time again. But we've got answers to all these. We know the situation. Renewable systems, as I said earlier, they include the policies which are needed to create the framework that encourages and supports renewable energy. We need a massive increase in energy efficiency programs and decentralized energy systems. And we need to provide energy services for the 1.4 billion people who are the world's poorest that don't have such access, which obviously brings particular benefits for women and children. And obviously we need more research and development as well as deployment. The benefits of sustainable renewable energy, or the benefits of these systems, is obviously that it provides the energy services without destabilizing the climate. We have cleaner air, land and water that protects human health, livelihoods and ecosystems. They are safer, they're more resilient to natural disasters. What kept the lights on in Japan after the tsunami were wind generators. None of the big utilities kept going. It was the wind power that kept the lights on in Japan. They don't produce hazardous or toxic waste. They can be relatively rapidly deployed. And for the 1.4 billion who are not connected to the grid, it's often the cheapest option because they won't be connected to the grid anytime in the near future, which is very expensive. And importantly, and this to me comes to the crux of it, it is about community empowerment and localized control. That to me is the key barrier. All the renewable energies that we talk about and decentralized energy is about how we can translate energy resources into the requirements that people need. The blockages that are there are the fossil fuel industry, the nuclear industry, because they control the resource. They own the source of the energy. Renewable energy and decentralized energy does not own the source of the energy. It owns the technology that translates the energy into a use. And that's a very, very different model. It is an empowering model, and what it comes down to, it is about political power as well. So this to me is a crux of the matter in achieving the energy transition and change, which is where I put up there. It is a fundamental restructuring, power restructuring, political power as well as energy power in society. That to me is what the change is. So in order to get there, there's a whole range of things that we need. And I just put these down. Progressive government intervention. Government set the framework. We know that government is susceptible to the lobby powers. We know that 5 times as much money goes into lobbying, the cost goes into lobbying for fossil fuels than does renewables. So we do need governments to have action plans with appropriate targets to encourage renewable energy. We need resources. We need, according to the IEA, we need something like $40 trillion over the next 30 to 40 years for energy developments. Currently, most of the money goes to unsustainable energy developments, so we need to remove the policies that undermine and suppress clean energy, the legal frameworks that support centralized power, and loans and aid that support fossils or nukes. So this is basically talking about subsidies, it's talking about the current political power structure as well. And we need to get rid of these fossil fuel production subsidies. They have been estimated to anywhere between $409 billion annually, that's consumption subsidies according to the IEA, up to $1 trillion a year. The most recent figures of the amount of subsidies, consumption and production, that go to the fossil fuel industry. That's not including nukes. But the subsidies is a difficult issue. In the south, we know what happens when governments try to remove consumption subsidies. You get a situation in Nigeria recently where there were riots because the price of fuel went up and so on. So we do need to be very cognizant of the fact that consumption subsidies, at least at the moment in southern parts, can benefit some of the poorest. But to remember that only 20% of current consumption subsidies benefit 8% of the poorest in different countries. But consumption subsidies in poor developing countries benefit the middle classes. They don't really benefit the poorest. So to provide energy access to the poorest, we need to acknowledge it's key. We need action plans to assess countries' energy production and distribution infrastructure. Developing countries, which are looking to expand energy, need to prioritize energy access for the poorest sectors and avoid the lock-in to polluting technologies. Developed countries need to allocate sufficient resources to developing countries with the finance and technology for the transition, and we need to avoid any false solutions such as clean coal, nuclear or large biomass, because that's playing into 2 minutes left. So, as my conclusion, I would say that in our strategic discussions about energy transitions, we have to be attentive to the different realities and challenges in different regions, not in different countries, both north and south, but also in the north. There's a big difference between Poland and Germany, stating the bleeding obvious. But we have a meeting in Poland next week, specifically in Poland, to talk about what we can do about Poland and climate and so on. So, but we need to be really aware of the different realities and the challenges that build strong social movements for a low carbon future. I was struck by somebody this morning saying we need to build alliances with social movements. We certainly do. A lot of the comments made for this presentation I took from the presentation I made at the World Social Forum about the need for energy transition. Because what do we say to coal miners in West Virginia who live in towns of 10,000 people that rely on the coal mine now? That's the responsibility we have. Having said that, I believe it's happening. And this is where I think, I was listening to a presentation earlier from the Climate Alliance, I think they were, all these wonderful stories about solar roofs and things. It is happening, it's just not happening fast enough. And I think we need to do a lot more about telling the stories about how what we know life is like and is going to be like in the cities that is powered by decentralized energy, clean energy. And it's a vision of the future that is happening now, and we need to be articulating that and putting it out there, because nothing succeeds like success. And the public is going to get on our side if we've got a good story to tell, not if we've got that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions concerning the content? So if you have a question on issues that you haven't understood, you could ask them now, but if it's more about the discussion, then I would prefer to have it after the second presentation. So
the couple of questions listed on the agenda, namely, how does the energy transition help us tackling the climate change protection? And if we're going to form a sort of an energy transition club, what are the major elements, and who should and who need to be in this kind of transition club? And also, what are the examples and country cases that we can use in this energy transition? And lastly, what should the civil society organization do, and how should they specialize or cooperative? I think I'll start from a very simple question. Why do we need an energy transition? I think to people sitting in this room, it's very obvious, first and foremost, to tackle the climate change and the environmental challenge associated with it. But I think the point is, if we come back to our home country, like China or other developing country, there is a gap between recognizing climate change as an environmental problem and to start or initiate actual action on the energy sector. So in China, I think the case is very clear. Climate change is perceived as a very fundamental and important environmental challenge for human beings. But on the other hand, there's a challenge that the public cannot do much about it. One of the biggest reasons is the energy structure that we have in China, which is basically a monopolized electricity market, where the energy consumer doesn't have too much say in a lot of the energy issues. So I think this is something not only for China, but also for a lot of other countries will face when talking about energy transition. The other thing on the cases or the example of energy transition, I think there are two challenges from my perspective. One is there is too few examples for us to have. It's mainly Germany and Japan. And in the Chinese context, people always doubt whether this is a persuasive cases that China can follow suit, because they say Germany or Japan, it's better. I mean, they are relatively well off, and whether we at this development stage can follow suit for them. And And the other argument a lot of the Chinese will have is it's basically a phenomenon after the Fukushima, after a very drastic disaster. So these are the two challenges. The other thing is also communication. I think you mentioned about this. There is not very comprehensive introduction or communication of the German case or the Japanese case to China at least. So this is also creating the difficulties for us to push for energy transition in China at least. I think the other thing that I want to talk is regarding to this idea of energy transition club. I think this is a really good idea, and I would like to offer two, I think, very fresh thought I capture from the recent China renewable energy discussion. One is that there is a recent interesting topic and discussion on a kind of new foreign policy or international relations based on renewable energy. This is very much as a result of the recent countervailing anti-dumping case that the Chinese solar industry got from the US and European Union. But to a larger extent, I think this is a new and good idea as opposed to the traditional typical foreign relations based on fossil fuel, like the Iraq War, which is arguably largely based on the traditional fossil fuel industry. So if there could be more renewable energy industry-based foreign policy, bilateral or multilateral relations, I think this is something that's worth exploring, or at least a very new discussion that is currently undergoing in China. The other thing is the South-South cooperation. When we're talking about energy transition, it's currently mainly a north to south discussion. But where I see China could fit into this discussion is somewhere between the traditional definition of north versus south. I think China fits in somewhere in the middle. China has the advantage of being a very large country, a relatively developing country. And China has, for example, in the solar and wind industry, the very benefited industry policy that allows China to develop the manufacturing capacity really quick. And that could also benefit other southern countries in this perspective. Maybe technology from the northern country, or maybe the policy lessons from the northern country, and China adopt that and proliferate to other developing countries. So these are the two initial thoughts in regarding to the energy transition club. In terms of what civil society organization can and should do, I think I'll just use the Greenpeace China example. We've been one of the biggest chunk of our work in China is tackling coal. From the very beginning, coal mining to coal to the processing process, and also to coal-fired power plant. In this work, we actually initiated and used a lot of different approach and different perspectives. From the water issue, the water consumption in coal mining, and the air pollution issue in coal-fired power plant, which is gaining a big momentum in the eastern part of China, where the economy is well developed. The public really has the concern on air pollution. We also try to utilize the finance aspect of it. So I think Greenpeace China right now is basically handling all of those different perspectives single-handedly right now. But I think what we would like to see is we have more civil society organizations specialized in those different areas. And also could be food security and the climate change as a larger issue. So you could have this water, finance, climate, energy nexus that different civil society organizations can work on together and really utilize their specialization. So I think I'll stop here and I'll probably leave more to the exchange.
Okay, so thank you very much, both of you, for your very interesting talks and also for the different perspectives that we had from a global campaigning perspective and from a Chinese perspective. I think that was really interesting, and that perfectly leads to the debate that we are going to have now among ourselves. I would suggest to move a bit together, because like this we cannot really discuss. So maybe we can form kind of a circle, and so leave it a little open here so that we can also write down the debate. And as I mentioned before, we have thought about 3 possible questions, and it would be now a question to you whether you think these are the questions that we should now discuss, and also really on how to move forward on what could be done, talking about what can we learn from each other, what can we learn from different countries, from different perspectives. This is also what has been mentioned by Paul. What are the barriers? You have already mentioned some of them. And then finally also come to the conclusion, what can we actually do, and what are the ideas in this group on how to work further on moving the energy transition forward. So first of all, what is your opinion about, is it what you want to discuss, or do you have other issues that you would like to discuss? So that would be the first question to all of you.
I'm not sure whether we can go straight into what we can learn from each other. I mean, we can talk about what we can learn from the presentations, but I don't know very much about the experiences of everybody in terms of what they think about the energy transition apart from this. So I don't know, maybe we need to ask an additional question before, or we can start with what we can learn from the presentations that were given, or maybe go into different cases, the German case of the Energiewende, what went well, what didn't.
Any other ideas? It's really up to you, and I will just try to follow and try to get the results out of it. So that would be a possibility. Just as you said, either referring to what has been mentioned by Paul, or we have some people from Germany here, so that might be also an option, that what went well, what didn't go so well. But when it comes to the worldwide question, I'd rather also hope to make links to others, but that's really up to you.
Well, is it more a question of us? I mean, there's plenty of people in this room who can share experiences, but there's a lot of experiences not in this room. And maybe we need to think about how we can take this forward in creating a space for learning, exchanging experiences from each other as a thing that needs to be done in order to help the transition.
So you would mean that we would think of who else would we need to...
How would we create a space where we know, if we identify learning from each other as a good thing, how do we create the space that we can do that, not just here, but in the coming period?
Maybe where people can input their stories, experiences, and we'd have a space where everybody could access and learn.
Yeah. A place to share information, I guess.
Okay, so actually we already jumped into the first one, right?
Yeah.
So then I would suggest that I will put a sticker here, and I'll try to collect what from the Chinese perspective. That might be also
Oh yeah, sure. Well, I think I addressed one point in regarding to this just now. I think it's more of a question: how are we going to facilitate this, learning experience? Because I mean, a lot of times the knowledge and information got lost because of language barrier, because of just, it's just really hard to learn what is going on really in Germany right now. So I think this kind of channel is not there yet, in my opinion. And this is actually something that we try to work on in Greenpeace and in, I think, a lot of other Chinese NGOs, just to bring in the lessons. But I guess it is a question of how can we do this, and how can we do this even better.
I would also like to raise the question from the impressions other stakeholders in other countries have. So in discussion with several people also not out of Germany and experts who are into the topic said it's really difficult to access to English language-based papers about what's going on in Germany. So is this a common ground that this is really a large problem? And in terms of how to communicate the success or the challenges of the energy transition in Germany? Because I think this is very important, the question of how to communicate such a transition. And if there's no kind of paper knowledge available about the process in language everybody understood, is I think one may also come better in. So
my impression is that there's not so much reflection outside of Germany about what is going on. Probably after Fukushima, many people were aware that Merkel decided to take several power plants off the grid. I think this was so massive that this was taken into account. But we just had a short conversation, even Stuttgart 21, which is a very powerful example of what can happen if the public gets involved. And to my point of view, has had impact also on the decision of Ausstieg from this. Should we have nuclear power usage in Germany or not? From this long discussion. To my view, this was very crucial. A crucial point for the decision that followed, but still Stuttgart 21 seems to be unknown to most people outside of Germany, even though this had so many impact on several things. And to my view, even the German public in a broader sense is not so much aware of what is going on, and we have a lot of, I experience a lot of labeling. We have this Energiewende, it's everywhere. This kind of formula, we are doing Energiewende, but I have the impression that the public debate is taken over by several stakeholders and by several stakeholders that have a certain perception of what Energiewende, energy transition should be, and they are doing their thing, and all the rest is left to follow them or follow or whatever. And civil society is not as quick as we should be to keep up the current process. That's my perception.
Any other, I think it's really interesting to hear from other countries, maybe from you as well, what you would know about what is happening in Germany, and you don't know why it's not.
I mean, again, language barriers could probably come into it as well, but it's not something that is, I guess, easily accessible to in terms of where, who to talk to. Because again, it's a very decentralized movement in itself. So again, there isn't just one person you can speak to. So it's again, it's the reason why it's so successful is also part of the problem why it's, I guess, hard to understand exactly what it's going on, which is good in a way. And I don't know if, again, the German model should be replicated any sorts to any other country, because I'm sure it was created with its specific in background. And it's, I guess, the question of emergence. You can't predict what, with a complex system like that, you can't predict what the end product is going to be. And that's the way it should be if it is actually efficient. So yeah, maybe you're not supposed to know.
I feel it would be great if there was a space where all of these stories could just go, that everybody could get access to. You know, we know we can sort of do that if we've got internet access, but that kind of resource is even I tend to know a bit what's going on in different places, but I didn't know about that. I just think that Shaw said about what China said about Japan and Germany. You can't do that because it's wealthy. In the UK, if you talk about Germany as a good example, people in the UK will say, well, it's okay for Germany, they're better off than we are. You know, so the same thing is said in the UK, that island off the west coast of Europe, as China is saying. So that to me says there's a story going around here that's trying to maintain the status quo. They don't want to change. But if we can share these stories like that.
For me, it's quite interesting because, on the one hand, I would say one part of the energy transition Germany is until now successful. This is the extension of renewable energies. But the other part, has mentioned energy efficiency, is probably not successful in Germany. We are not really an efficient country, and also efficiency trends in Germany is not increasing. So therefore, I don't want to. That's an example for what does not work. So therefore, the Germans have to learn from other countries. They're maybe more efficient than this. But I fear that energy efficient worldwide is a problem. Yeah. So therefore, so this is a big topic for all of us. So therefore, I think we should distinguish to talk about success stories there between renewable energies. There we have really, from nearly nothing in 2000, like 3 or 4% share. We have now something like 25% share of renewable energy within only 12 years or something like this. So I think this is really a success story, and it's mainly to do with feed-in tariffs in Germany, and with that people really gains from this. So they really get paid off relatively good because they invest in renewable energies. And it's, by the way, not success stories of the great companies in Germany, success stories of the people and the farmers and the municipalities. So this is really an interesting case, and if this is not communicated well, then this could be a first idea of what should we get out of this here. So can we create communication platform for success stories on energy transition? Would be one idea for me.
When I think about the energy transition in Germany, I agree with that it shouldn't be about us copying the model, but rather thinking about what brought Germany to that point, and trying to think about what could bring each of our countries to that point as well. And from my observations, I don't know how accurate they are here. One of the things was public pressure. I mean, Merkel is a conservative. Conservatives, from my guess, aren't that ambitious. So if it wasn't for her constituency, she probably would not have been ready for the Energiewende. That's one. The other thing was the timing that was linked to Fukushima. When Fukushima happened, that was also a certain point on a timeline where Germany felt inclined to say, okay, now this is the time we go publicly and say we're going to phase out nuclear. So looking at political situations along the timeline is also another thing we could try to look at. And the third thing businesses, companies that are open to it. A lot of companies knew that they would benefit from the energy transition. They have something in it for them. It wasn't just about the coal and fossil fuel industries, but about industries that want to invest in renewables, energy efficiency, that saw a benefit in the market. So those were the three things that I learned personally. Yeah. If they were wrong, please.
What I think.
Yeah, I think you're partly right about the third part. I think the economy or business was very divided on this issue. The majority were against the transition plan. They were better off with the former political status. The thing about the first thing you mentioned is that it doesn't explain anything. It needs to be explained. Why public pressure? How does the public pressure generate? I mean, that's the interesting factor, and that's why I'm very hesitant to say anything about this, because these are cultural issues which probably reach very deep. We have this green movement history in Germany, but why did we have it? Why did we have this very strong push against this? That's one element to be taken from this. This was not the trigger. Was, of course, you said this benefit thing, and we want renewables and we benefit from them. But it was also this anti-nuclear movement, which was very strong. So it was something against something. And this is very much in dire need to be explained why it's in Germany so strong. I mean, there could be a deep-rooted distrust in front of centralized, state-driven decisions, as the nuclear energy was, without any doubt. So, in difference to France, where French don't have this visceral problem with nuclear energy. So this is a cultural factor which can't be copied or translated to another place, but you would have to identify similar patterns of reaction against and pro things. And there are a lot of other things. I mean, this Stuttgart 21 thing you mentioned was also very much an utterance of distrust against state-driven top-down decisions. So this also comes into this energy that we want to do things more bottom-up ourselves. This is something to be looked at in a neutral way. I wouldn't even say it is only positive. I think there are, in this decentralization drive, there are also very doubtful things, like I want to build my thing independent from others. And so it's a bit this same, might be the same driver which really makes people like cars. To be on the driving seat myself. I mean, I'm a sociologist, sometimes I go too deep into this. But what I wanted to say, this how to build public pressure is really a cultural issue, and you need to look carefully at it. And of course, we also, I think in Germany, we were surprised how things came out. We knew that public opinion was a long time, also like 25 or 30 years against nuclear power, and the majority, at latest, I think since Chernobyl, we were like, the majority was against it, and there was no alternative at the time, no clear alternative. Then the alternative showed up, and there was a lot done for it, and then there was this trigger, Fukushima, and then it happened. But before, nobody could have said this will evolve this way.
I think what all of you have mentioned are parts of the success story, and it shows that there are some things that are very specific to Germany. And what I think is interesting is the question, what is specific to Germany and cannot be translated to other countries, and maybe what is in there that might also be interesting, or might also help other countries going renewable or going energy efficient or whatever. So this question of bottom-up movement to me seems one element in this, but that would be interesting too.
You need to identify the things that make people angry. For instance, I mean that's
if you describe it a little bit in a very blunt way, you could say that people were going mainly because they felt the society's contract violated. They felt like we are not told real information, we are somehow manipulated, and we don't want that. And this might be a trigger which can be found in any society. And also, I would say one of the bases of successful protests and successful new options is that information is spread a long time, that there's many people engaged in new new topics, and that you can meet people on the street of whom you know this person has this opinion and stands for it. And this is also not typically German, so if you have a ground movement for any topic, then you can rely on it if the time comes. And this is important. If there's nobody working for a specific topic, then it will be difficult to raise awareness in it.
So your recommendation would be to help to create groups or citizens groups to work on it? That would be
yes, because as we have seen, you cannot predict things, but what you can say is that you need a certain basis, and you never know which method will work out, but you have to try several things, and you have not to say, okay, we don't know what works, so we don't do anything. This will certainly not help. And yeah, this is very easy to put it in these words, but that's basically it.
Even with some so-called environmentalists that are now really pushing the nuclear as the answer to climate change, it's staggering. But the culture and the context within which we're working is really, really important. You're right, I don't think Germany's response to Fukushima would have been the same if it hadn't had 20 or 30 years of anti-nuclear movement that's laid all that fertile ground for it. It wouldn't have happened. It's the cause and effect. And I was at just my little local village in where I live in the UK, southeast. There's a proposal for a small solar park that's going to be in one of the fields behind some hedges. There was a public meeting of over 150 people in the local village hall, and I was the only person that supported the solar park. Everyone were vehemently against it.
Why? What were the arguments?
It will spoil my view. This is taking land out of agricultural production. It's near a natural beauty area. All of which, is just, it was a reaction. All of those are excuses, but it was a reaction against something that was coming in from outside that, and I know the guys, I said, why didn't you come into the community, engage the community, talk to the people there beforehand, instead of just suddenly everybody getting through the door, there's planning permission for solar panels. Everybody just went up in arms because, such a crap selling job. But it's the culture. Communities don't like surprises.
Not in their backyard.
Not in their backyard.
Maybe you have the same in Germany.
I'm sure. I think that is probably fairly common.
But one of the success stories in Germany, I would say, is that we have in the beginning of all these wind farms, there were really a lot of people fighting. It was a minority, I would say, but this minority was fighting hard against a lot of the new wind parks in the early 2000 years. So I think sometimes it's quite easy because it's just a matter of time that people get used to it. People don't like changes anyway. So this is, and the first solar park, this first solar panel is maybe a shock, or I don't know, but the exciting thing is how can you sometimes you have to just stay cool and wait 1 or 2 years, and maybe, and of course always a win-win situation is if the people gain from it. So if people can get money out of it, well, this is quite quite easy story that you need co-produce and all these things that way.
But these are lessons that we need to share with each other. So